Thanks. Great, you can hear me okay? Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. And I'm the Chief Water Officer at CharityWater. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about data and one of the really exciting developments in our world, which is a remote sensor that fits on hand pumps and transmits flow data that we can see on the other side of the world. But I'm also going to tell you about the context in which that sensor lives and how we are using programmatic monitoring and evaluation data to tie it all together and tell the story of the change that we are achieving and seeking to achieve for people who don't have access to clean water. So I joined CharityWater about 4 years ago, and when I started, I was just so fascinated by this organization that had so much data at their fingertips. This was an organization that had mapped on Google Earth every single project that they had ever invested in, and we had this amazing data set. And as I joined the organization, I was really interested in one of those little points that was in the western part of the Central African Republic. And the reason I was interested in that one point was because I grew up there. My parents were Lutheran missionaries. That's me. In about 1975, in a little village called Buar. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. Like, CharityWater sponsored this project in 2008. So what's going on with it? Like, is it helping people that I might have grown up with? Is it still working? And the reality is that there was no information about that particular project. And this wasn't unique to us. This is how our sector works. We do our best to implement sustainable, high-quality projects for our beneficiaries. We work with governments, but then we move on to the next project. And we've never had information about what happens after we leave, and do they need additional help from us. So about that time, CharityWater was in discussions with Google, and Google.org came forward and funded an idea we had to create this remote sensor that would fit on a well like that and tell us the answer to that question. Is it working? Are people using it? And what's the status of it? So I'm going to come to that in a second, but to give you some context, CharityWater was founded about 9 years ago by a guy named Scott Harrison. Our mission is to end the world water crisis. Today, as we sit here, 663 million people around the world drink water like this every day. This is what it looks like in Ethiopia. This is what it looks like in East Africa. People sharing water with animals. The health impacts of this are terrible. The impacts on women and girls are terrible. And it is one of the great injustices of our world today. This is a woman that I came across in the Tana River area of Kenya. I mean, in the most horrible conditions. It was 110 degrees. She's digging in the sand, and one coffee cup at a time, she's filling her jerry cans, and she's going to carry these things, 40 pounds each, back to her house and give dirty water to her children. And I asked her, why aren't you using the river? Because the Tana River was nearby, and this was the option of the Tana River. And she said, I don't go there because there are crocodiles there. Like, these are real tragedies that are playing out for millions and millions of families around the world. And our vision is to create a world where that doesn't exist, and that's a thing of the past. So it's a huge problem, and as we went around the world, we came across amazing organizations on the ground, inspiring local professionals who were doing great work, and we invested in them and have scaled them up and are now implementing projects across the world. So the primary problem we were trying to fix was giving people access to clean water, but all of a sudden we realized that we were facing a secondary problem, which was that when we went out to ask people for support, for donations, 42% of Americans don't trust charities, and they didn't want to give us money. So from the very beginning, we've worked very hard on mechanisms, and specifically using data and technology to create trust and show people the impact of their funding on the ground. So that really drove, from the very beginning, us mapping every single project and then running an algorithm which will assign every single donor to a particular project. So In the course of the last 9 years, we've funded 20,000 projects across 24 countries. We are proud of our results. You know, we've solved 1% of the global problem, but every year, millions of children die of preventable waterborne diseases, and the race is on to solve the world water crisis, and we're doing it as fast as we can. So back to my question, like, what's going on with these projects? And I want to tell you the story sort of in a linear progression of one particular village and how all of the programmatic monitoring and evaluation data is coming together and being stitched together into a story that we can understand about the impact that we're having, and the donors who have supported us can understand what's going on out there also. So this is northern Ethiopia. It's a state called Tigray. There are about 6 million people who live there. And we have funded about 4,000 completed projects in that area. It's our most ambitious project in the world. And before we fund a project, long before the project actually exists, there's a campaigner. And our data trail starts with who campaigned for the money for that particular project. So this is a very sad story, but it's a very inspiring story. So I'm going to tell you the story of Rachel. She was a 9-year-old girl. She gave up her birthday, started a campaign with Charity Water, and had a goal of $300, and she fell a little bit short. She raised $220. And after her birthday, she said to her mother, I'm going to try harder next year. And next year, I'm going to hit my goal. And tragically, a few weeks after her 9th birthday, she and her mother were in a terrible car accident, and Rachel was killed. Her church started to donate to her campaign in memory of her. And she lived in Seattle, and people in Seattle started to donate. And this thing gathered momentum, and it went viral. And over the following weeks, Rachel's campaign raised $1.2 million, which funded 143 villages in northern Ethiopia. So when we think about this sort of sacred trust that we have being entrusted with donors' resources and our beneficiaries' lives, we take it very, very seriously. So of those 143 villages, there's one called Beato. It has about 250 people. Rachel's campaign happened in 2011. The project was built in 2012. In 2013, we closed the loop with the donors and sent them, at that point, what was all the information we had. This was our report to them. Every donor got a report like this for every different project. Showed you GPS coordinates, photographs, cost $10,568. You could see all of the different donors who contributed to that particular project. You could see it on Google Earth. And that was it. We closed the loop, and that was where we fade to black, and the story ends. But we were really much more interested in, like, what is the change that we're affecting out there? So in the coming years, we started to collect a lot of data through hundreds of household surveys, trying to answer the question of what was life like before and life like after for this community in Beato. So we surveyed hundreds of households in this area, and we have surveyors out with mobile tablets and devices. Hundreds of thousands of cells of code are coming in, and out of that, here's what we're learning. On average, in this part of the world, people are walking almost a half-hour round trip for water. So that means if you lived here and you wanted to get clean water every day, you'd walk all the way down to the end of this channel and back, and typically you'd be a young girl or a woman, and you'd be carrying 40 pounds on your back. But we also found out that 8% of the population, so this year we'll provide clean water to 240,000 people in northern Ethiopia in this region. Of those, 19,000 of them are walking more than an hour. That means your water source is at South Station. If you can imagine doing that morning and night every single day and the life impact of that, you start to understand the magnitude of this crisis. We also have learned that 60% of the population are using sources of water like this, and the other 40% are using wells that might be in another community where they're walking extra distance. And the worst part is when they get there, on average, their waiting time is 56 minutes. So you start to add all of this up, and you think about the burden to families to do this every single day. When they get a water project, and we do the Endline survey, what we learn is the water is 6 minutes away. We've cut the waiting time in half, and overnight they're consuming 30% more water. And we never knew this before. We always knew we were doing good, but we were never able to quantify it. And of course, use that to make programmatic changes. So 2 years ago, we hired a bunch of surveyors and mechanics. This guy's name is Cisse, and in the first year, they rode 130,000 kilometers around the backcountry, visiting every single project twice. Cisse has an Instagram account. He's pretty entertaining if you want to follow him. And here he is out with his spare parts. So when I look in our database, I see that one of these guys visited in early 2015. The project was working. Again, in middle of 2015, so they visited 3 times last year, this particular village, and we have maintenance records on that. And then our data just took an absolute quantum leap when we finally installed this sensor that we had been working on for almost 4 years. So here's the sensor. It's this black box right here. It fits right on the well. It costs us about $100 each to produce them. They measure water by the level of water in the pump along that mast. There are 6 sensors, and depending on the level of water, then it has an algorithm which tells you how much water is coming out. The installation is very easy. It takes about 10 minutes. There is no technical side to this. Here's the team putting it on. And all of a sudden, data starts flowing in, and I can see it from New York. This is what I see. So for Beato, that village funded by people who wanted to remember Rachel, all of a sudden, I can see this from my desk in New York. These are hourly liters flowing across the day, and you see morning and night. So it's the middle of the night, then you have the morning peak, and the afternoon peak, the morning peak and the afternoon peak, every single day. And if it breaks, we would see that, and we could dispatch the mechanics to help them out. So here, if you zoom in on one particular day, you can see that they got up, somebody got up and got a jerry can at like 5 in the morning, but then by 8, it was really peaking. And in the afternoon, they also peak again, but by 7 p.m., they're pretty much done, and they're moving on. So that means for this particular day, there were 2,765 liters pumped out of this one well, which is an astounding amount of water for a single day. And you think back over all of that time that this well has been out there for the last 3 years, it's more than 3 million liters pumped out of this one well for $10,568. And we never knew this. And you think about all of the millions of stories that are playing out every day as a result of our work and our partners' work, and our ability to understand that going forward is about to go through an absolutely radical transformation. We're very early on in this. The sensor is open source, so you could go on our website and download the designs and download the firmware, and if you want to build one, you can. We had a lot of design constraints around it, around cost, resilience, battery life, ability to measure chaotic water flow. We've resolved many of those, and we've produced 3,500 of them. 1,000 are currently installed in northern Ethiopia. 700 are working, and the others are in cell phone dead zones because it's pretty spotty. And we know that because when we move them out of the red areas and move them into the blue areas, they start transmitting and giving us data. So in the aggregate, across big data, across all 700, you start to see the patterns of morning and afternoon, and the liters pumped just so clear across all of these different sensors. Now, it's not perfect, and what you can see here is daily liters since this sensor was installed in November. You can see the sensor had some sort of error message with these peaks. That's not correct. We need to figure out what went wrong on those particular days. But this is what's interesting to us, and this is why we're focused on these sensors. Because in those 7 days, that pump didn't pump any water. And in those 7 days, that means this is happening. And the sensors are going to help us avoid this and continue to maintain the progress that we're making for beneficiaries and hold true to the promise that we made to folks who gave to Rachel's campaign, that their donation was not in vain and it will change lives, and people will have access to clean water. These kinds of technologies are really exciting. It's very early days, and they're going to leverage our resources in an incredible way. And I can't wait to see what the future holds. So those are the sensors. That's how we're tying them all together. And thank you very much for listening.